What's up guys, welcome to the second video of the How to Audit Cash series. If you happen to miss the first video, make sure to go watch that one first so you know exactly where we're at in the cash testing process. In this video, we're gonna go over how to test and get comfortable with bank confirmations, how to test and review deposits in transit, and also how to test and review outstanding checks. If that sounds interesting to you guys, let's hop into the testing. All right, guys, we're gonna get straight into our testing. Like I mentioned a little earlier, if you haven't watched the first video, make sure to watch that one first because I kind of went over exactly what makes up a bank confirmation. And now we're gonna get actually into the testing of it. So one thing that you guys need to remember, anytime you start looking at a roll forward or anything that leads up into the GL balance, which is in column J here, which is the total cash that we have on hand, anytime you have a roll forward or anything that leads up into a final balance, you need to get comfortable with every single item in between that. For example, in our bank reconciliation, again, just to recap, our bank reconciliation to get from a cash to an accrual basis, we're gonna go from our bank balance, add deposits in transit, less outstanding checks, plus or minus reconciling items is our ending GL balance. Again, we're gonna start off with our bank balance plus deposits in transit, less outstanding checks, plus or minus any reconciling items is gonna get us to our ending GL balance. But again, we need to get comfortable with every single line item in our roll forward or bank reconciliation in this example. So we said here from our last video that we're gonna let's say for example, we did what we needed to do yesterday, and now we're back at it today, and we need to send bank confirmation. So we did send a bank confirmation, and how you send bank confirmations is gonna be different depending on what firm you're at. And a lot of people, I remember in practice, I used confirmation.com. Or you can send actual paper confirmations that are a little bit maybe old school. Maybe your firm does them electronically. Whatever the case may be, preparing them is something that's really critical. Usually a lot of associates do that. So make sure to ask your senior what type of software you guys are using or how to actually prepare it. So in our example here, we're gonna go to the bank confirmation, and this is what a bank confirmation is going to look like. And they're all kind of very similar, but essentially we have a standard form to confirm, which essentially what we're trying to do here, if we go back to our bank reconciliation, the bank balance here, they're saying that at 12/31/2022, they have cash in the bank of $22,000, $35,000, and $36,000 at these separate bank accounts, and they're all with Chase Bank. That's what they're representing to us. And how do we get comfortable with this number? Well, we're going to test it. If they're saying it's at a bank, we're going to send a third-party bank confirmation to get comfortable with this. So, for example, we're going to send a standard form to confirm. Again, this can be done electronically or a paper confirmation. Whatever your firm uses or whatever the team has decided you guys are going to do, make sure to do that. But one thing we'll need to do is when we receive this bank confirm, as you can see, it's from Chase Bank. We put the address in there, who we're gonna either mail it to or email it to or electronically. Customer name, CPA Swag Inc. The customer has to authorize, so our client, which is the bank's customer, has to authorize that, some third party, which is us, the auditors, some independent third party, needs to confirm certain balances. Since these balances are very confidential, right? A company, especially this is a private company, this company doesn't want just random people knowing how much they have in the bank. So they have to obviously approve, our client has to approve the bank, letting them know, hey, confirming our bank balances is okay. So for example here, customer note, which is again our client, we have provided to our auditors the following information as of the close of the business on 12/31/2022 regarding our bank account balances. Please confirm the accuracy of the information, noting any exceptions, if any, to the information provided. They're saying that they have a depository account of $22,000, checking account of $35,000, and an AP disbursement account of $36,000 as of 12/31/2022, and they also listed out the different account numbers here. So our client, which is the bank's customer, said that they have these different amounts at the bank currently right now, and what's going to happen is that the banks, whoever they assign at the bank, typically it's like the relationship leader or someone at the bank who we're addressing this to, is going to confirm these balances. In our example, Chris Brown, not to be confused with the rapper maybe, the bank manager is going to sign saying, they actually signed this confirmation saying, hey, it looks like your CPA Swag does in fact have these amounts at the bank at 12/31/2022, and Chris Brown obviously signed this here, and he dated it March 11th, 2023, which obviously is in the future, but you guys get the example. And then also too, they also add, let's just say for example that our client had represented that they had a certain amount at the bank, and it turns out that they actually did it for maybe clerical reasons or whatever the case may be. So typically, whoever you're confirming it with, whether it's the bank, whether it's a customer, whoever you're sending a confirmation to, there's typically a section in every confirmation that gives you a chance, or that gives whoever's signing the confirmation to say, hey, this is what I currently have in my internal records for your client. So there might be a discrepancy. Any discrepancies are usually noted in the comments, but from this example, we don't have any discrepancies, so we're good. So the first thing you need to do though is we need to cross-reference to the bank rec. So what we need to do, so when you're preparing a bank confirmation, maybe it's going to be a separate work paper in your audit file, but in this example, we're going to have our whole cash testing is in one workbook. So all we really need to do is reference tab 1 here. We're going to go Alt NSH. We're going to add an arrow letting the reviewer know, hey, tab 1, these bank amounts are all located on tab 1. All right, we made that red, and we're going to add also a tick mark to it. So we're going to cross-reference back to, we're going to add a tick mark there also. And tick marks just let the reviewer know. They add an additional documentation letting whoever's going to review your work know, hey, this is exactly what I'm doing with the work that was presented here. So accuracy check. One thing we always need to do too, we're going to add a space there. We're going to check it back to the bank rec. So we're going to add some documentation here. And again, we're going to make it red just to make it distinct from the actual bank. Typically, some firms will do this. Some will keep it all black. I've seen that at my previous firm, we did it in blue, but let's just use red, for example. So we're going to use bank reconciliation. There we go. Let's see. We'll spell check that. Yeah, I spelled it right. Okay. All right. Bank reconciliation. All right. We're going to check back the accuracy to make sure that, they didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't put some amounts on the bank confirmation and we ended up having different amounts on the bank rec. So we need to do an accuracy check. So we're going to do this less whatever is the total, the sum, we're going to do the sum of the amounts we're confirming. So the amounts we're confirming are these 3 amounts. And look at that. We have no difference. Beautiful. So we did an accuracy check. We cross-referenced the amounts that we're confirming back to the bank rec. We did an accuracy check. Last thing we're going to do, we're just going to add some documentation to this real quick and simple. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to the bottom of this work paper. We're going to add tick mark legend in here. We're going to put A. All right. And we're going to do, that's it. So we added our documentation. Let's just make this all red, just again to distinguish it from the bank confirmation that we received. Okay, BC obtained the bank confirmation directly from Chase Bank. BC agreed the amounts noted on the bank confirmation directly to the bank reconciliation on tab 1. Per analysis of the bank confirmation, no exceptions were noted. As such, BC will pass on further testing. All right, so now we're pretty much done. We prepared the confirmation earlier on to confirm the balances of the bank that our client represented. We got it signed by our client, which is the bank's customer. We got it back noting that the bank manager signed the bank confirmation on, at March 11th, 2023. He noted no exceptions. We referenced them back to the bank reconciliation. And then let's see here. And then we added documentation on here. One thing I want you guys to start understanding too is that your documentation in your audit work papers is going to take you some time to get comfortable with and do. Again, I've been doing this for quite some time, so these things kind of just come top of head, because just because I have so many reps and I've been doing it so long, and even my documentation, I try to get better at it. But just be patient with yourself, but just try to use as much documentation as needed, just so you don't get any review notes from whoever's reviewing your work, whether it's your senior, a manager, a partner, or an engagement quality reviewer. So that's essentially it. That's pretty much what you need to do. When you get a bank confirmation from your bank, you need to make sure it's properly signed. You need to check, you need to agree it back to whatever information you're testing. You need to make sure that if there's any exceptions, you look into them, and finally you finalize it with some documentation. So all the steps to be completed, it looks like we have completed all of them. So we are now done. All right, so then let's go back to tab 1. So now we can unhighlight this in yellow. We're done with our bank confirmation. So let's say here, we're gonna add in the bank balance C testing on tab 4. So we're going to put that in red also and unhighlight that in yellow, and beautiful. That's it. So when someone comes to review this, they know exactly, hey, if I look at this bank balance and it's not highlighted yellow, it looks like it's been tested already. Oh, okay, I see the testing on tab 4, and then they can come here and see that we confirmed all the balances directly with the bank. So now let's move on to the deposits in transit. So from our first video, like we mentioned, deposits in transit are essentially checks that were sent to us by a customer or whoever before the cutoff date, which is 12/31/2022 in our example, but they somehow didn't make it to the bank yet. That's exactly what a deposit in transit is. And since we're on an accrual basis and that check is rightfully ours, even though it's in transit, we're increasing our cash balance from cash to an accrual basis. So what we need to do is this 21663, anytime you're doing a roll forward or testing a roll forward, and again, these numbers are hard coded in here, I want to see a detail of every single number that's getting me to the ending cash GL balance. So we were from our first video, we said that we would request a deposit in transit listing from the client. So we actually did, and we received it, and it is right here. So CPA Swag Inc. gave us a deposit in transit listing. I already added some documentation to it, but let's just see what documentation I added. BC obtained, reviewed, and footed, which is, I summed the whole thing, the deposit in transit listing below, which BC then agreed to the bank reconciliation on tab 1. Okay, that's letting the reviewer know I footed it, I checked it for accuracy, and I actually agreed it back to the bank rec. BC tested deposits in transit through cash cutoff testing at tab 7. So we did our testing on tab 7, which we'll get into in a little bit. But again, I've highlighted some key steps that we need to complete here. So let me zoom in a little bit here so you guys can see that. So steps to be completed. So check your accuracy. Okay, well, the first thing I did, as I said, okay, well, how much do I have? What's my deposits in transit on the actual bank rec? So I did that here, but quickly, we'll go to tab 1 and we'll see here our total deposits in transit are 21,663. Well, if we go to our deposit in transit listing, there you go. We added our test here. Let's just make that in red again to distinguish it from the PVC that we received. All right. So we did our accuracy check. So we know that the deposit in transit listing that was given to us by our client is actually accurate and it agrees back to the deposits in transit. Now we're done with step 1, sample design form. So I won't get too much into this one because whatever firm you're at is going to be different on how your sample parameters are used, how many samples you need. But essentially, every time you have a sample, so what I mean by sample, and for those of you that maybe aren't too experienced with audit, so we have essentially 4 different checks here, right? And this is just for example's sake, but you can have a deposit in transit listing that has like, oh my God, I don't know, 100, 200, and obviously not only is it not efficient, you'd never be done with the audit, obviously, right? We gain reasonable assurance that the balances are correct when we test the material balances, right? So we use sampling methodology. Every firm has different sampling methodology. So obviously the firm that you're at, the sample form that you're going to need to fill out is going to be completely different depending if you're at whatever, Deloitte, EY, Markham, Ernst & Young, whatever. If you're at a smaller firm, every firm has their different methodology. So that's obviously something you're going to have to figure out. But obviously ask your team or your senior, your manager, what the sampling parameters are. Obviously, you know your materiality. But for example, since we're going to test deposit in transit for existence, and this is one critical thing you need to know. Because since you're testing cash, which is an asset account, typically, unless your team determines that the risk is something different than the normal risk, an asset account is typically a good thing. Companies want to report assets on their balance sheet. So therefore, the risk is existence. The risk here, when you're testing deposits in transit, is that they're saying that they have certain deposits that really aren't in transit that it shouldn't be recorded until maybe after year end. So what you're going to do here is you're actually going to test from the listing itself. Always remember that when you're testing the existence of something, you're testing from the listing itself. So for example, here we have a few different checks here that we're going to need to get comfortable with. Again, for example's sake, we selected one selection to get comfortable with a total 21,000. Again, what your firm determines is your sampling methodology, your sampling parameters, or what it determines your total sample size to be, which is the total amount of selections you need to make, is going to be contingent on your firm and how your sampling methodology is used. But just for example's sake, I made one sample selection from this population of deposits in transit to get comfortable with the entire thing. So I tested this on tab 7, so we'll go there after we review the outstanding checks. But again, we added here, BC obtained, reviewed a footed deposit transit listing. BC then agreed the bank reconciliation to tab 1, and then we tested the deposits in transit through cash cutoff testing on tab 7. So we'll get into the cash testing on tab 7 after we review the outstanding checks. But that is really all you need to do. But one more thing, I'm sorry, that I need to add, that here, steps to be completed. Now that we made a sample selection, you're going to need to request a copy of the physical check from your client. Again, sometimes clients keep track of this stuff in Excel, sometimes it's all electronic, but in order to get comfortable that this deposit in transit is actually in transit and was sent from our customer, we actually need a copy of the actual check that was deposited in the bank, and it looks like here from the description on January 2nd, 2023, which is right after the cutoff. Although again, it didn't hit the bank until 2023, but it's saying here that it did have a check date of 12/31/2022. So therefore, it was sent prior to the cutoff year end date, which is 12/31/2022. So therefore, it does belong in cash. We need to get comfortable with that, as since we made one sample selection, we would then request the sample selection from our client. So now let's go ahead and review outstanding checks. And this is going to be very similar on how we're going to approach it, but it's going to be slightly different. So again, let's look at our steps to be completed. Check listing for accuracy. Again, we did the same thing. Bank reconciliation accuracy check. All right, let's go ahead and add that, put that in red here. All right, we're going to make that red. We're going to make that in red. And we have a difference of $102. Again, immaterial, not a big deal. Sometimes you're going to have slight differences from the actual details to whatever your client's representing. It's okay as long as it's not material. If this were material, we obviously would do further procedures, or we'd kick it back to the client. But this is immaterial. It's only $100 off, so we can get comfortable and actually test this amount. So now we checked the listing for accuracy. Again, sample design form is going to be completely contingent upon wherever firm you're at. Everyone has different methodology, but for our example's sake, we're going to make one sample selection. And okay, here's where testing outstanding checks gets a little bit tricky. Again, outstanding checks, if we're going to just assume that we have a normal risk of cash, which is overstatement of cash is a risk, outstanding checks reduce your cash balance because they're essentially checks that we cut prior to year end that didn't clear the bank until after year end. So let me explain. So maybe we write the check on 12/31/2022, but it doesn't get reflected in our bank statement that was confirmed already by our bank because it hasn't cleared yet. Whoever we sent the check to hasn't went to the bank and deposited it, so it hasn't been reflected in our bank statement. So the risk with outstanding checks is that there actually isn't enough. How do we know they didn't capture everything? So obviously here, a company would want to say, hey, well, maybe we don't want to include an outstanding check to report more cash on our balance sheet at year end. It could happen. I'm not saying it does happen, but it could happen. But this is why we test the completeness of this outstanding check listing. Every time you test the completeness of a listing, obviously you're not going to test directly from that listing itself because that's counterintuitive. The whole point of testing the outstanding check listing is to get comfortable with the completeness of it, that they put every single check that was cut before year end in this listing. And maybe they missed it, maybe they didn't, maybe it's a clerical error, whatever the case may be, that's what you're testing. So in order to get comfortable with the outstanding check listing to make sure it's complete, what we would do is we would ask our client for the subsequent bank statement. So essentially what we're doing is we're going to check the January, in our example, January 2023, we would request that subsequent bank statement because that subsequent bank statement is going to show all the checks and wires that cleared after year end. So if it cleared in sometime in January, then more likely than not, sometimes if it was written before year end, then it should be included in the outstanding check listing. Again, let me repeat that one more time. We're going to test our population size that we're going to select for sampling is going to become from our total checks and wires that cleared the bank after year end, or let's say our January 2023 bank statement. That population of checks and wires that clear the bank after year end, that's going to be our population for sampling, because all those checks and wires that cleared, we're going to sample 2, 3, or whatever you're required to sample, and we're going to see when those checks were cut. Let's say, for example, we make a sample selection and that check is cut prior to year end, then we would need to trace it. Let's say it was cut prior to year end, then that check should be in the outstanding check listing. Let's say the check was written on January 2nd, 2023. Would you expect to find it on the December 31st, 2022 outstanding check listing? No, right? Because it was written after year end. So that's what we're testing here. So a big distinction between deposit in transit, which is testing for existence, and when you're testing outstanding checks, you're testing for the completeness of that outstanding check listing, because it is reducing your cash balance. Okay, so then we went over that already, and then what we need to do here is, again, we are not gonna select directly from here. We're gonna select from our checks that clear the bank after year end. And for example's sake here, obviously you would request the January 2023 bank statement. So I, for example's sake, already have the total, which is 39,000. So from our sample design form, it looks like we only need to test one sample. So now we're going to look at the documentation that we wrote. And like I said earlier, documentation is going to take you some time to get comfortable with, but let's read what I wrote here. BC obtained the Chase Bank January 2023 bank statement for account number 333002889 directly from the client. Per analysis of the January 23 bank statement, BC noted that 39,000 of checks and wires have cleared the bank during the month. BC utilized the total checks and wire clears as a population for testing the completeness of the outstanding check listing. Please see tab 7 for test work performed. So now that we reviewed the outstanding check listing, we checked it for accuracy by agreeing it back to the bank reconciliation, and we have the January bank statement where we actually selected samples from. Now let's go to our actual cash testing on tab 7, where again we're going to test deposits in transit and outstanding checks. So now that we have here, and we added some documentation here, per the cash test work performed below, BC noted no exception. The bank reconciliation appears complete and accurate as of 12/31/2022. Obviously, we would write that in after we're done testing, but for example, cash testing, deposits in transit. Again, we selected the sample of the check, and what did we do? We asked our client, hey client, can you please give me a copy of the deposit of the check that I selected directly from the deposit in transit listing? So we selected the check. We documented here in our cash testing that we cited a copy of it. We traced it back to the listing on tab 5, which is here, which is selection 1. Is the check properly included? Well, it cleared on 1/2/2023 and it was written on 12/31/2022. So since this check was written prior to year end and it belongs rightfully to us, we need to include it in our cash balance on an accrual basis as of year end. So that is our deposit in transit testing. Now we're going to test outstanding checks. So from here, again, we selected a sample directly from the January 2023 bank statement, which is all the checks and wires that cleared after year end. So what we did here is we selected it. We asked our client for a copy of the check we sampled, and it's from the bank account for the AP disbursement bank account. The check, we cited the check number, we cited the check date. Since it was written prior to year end, 12/31/2022, and it cleared after, should it be included in our outstanding check listing? It was written prior to year end, but it didn't clear till after. So yes, it would be included in the outstanding check listing. And if we go to our outstanding check listing, we can see here, we traced it, it's right here. We traced it back to the outstanding check listing, which we're testing for completeness, to make sure that all the checks that were cut before year end and didn't clear till after are included in this listing to properly decrease our cash balance to get to an accrual basis as of year end. All right, so now that we have kind of completed our cash testing, let's go back to tab 1, which is the bank reconciliation, and let's kind of summarize everything and conclude this work paper. So, for example here, bank balance, we already went through the bank confirmation. We documented the bank confirmation. We're comfortable with the bank confirmation. No need to do any more work there. We tested it on tab 4, which is here. So we're gonna go ahead and put C testing on tab 4. The deposit in transit listing. That's already done. We got the deposit in transit listing on tab 5, and in here we documented that we did the testing on tab 7. So all we need to do to let the reviewer know that we already tested this is we're going to add the similar documentation here, but we're going to say C testing on tab, let's do 5 and 7. So they go review both tabs. So they understand that, hey, we reviewed the deposit in transit listing on tab 5. And when you go there, you can see that we documented, we did the testing on tab 7. So now the outstanding checks, it's going to be very similar. We're going to say, hey, we reviewed the outstanding check listing on tab 6 and we did the testing on tab 7. So let's go to add some space there. Beautiful. And then now we know, hey, every single part of our bank reconciliation, every component of it, which is made up of bank balance plus deposits in transit, less outstanding checks, plus or minus any reconciling items, which there aren't any, gets us to our ending cash balance. And we already tied this to the trial balance, which is step number 1 that you need to do all the time, because if it doesn't already tie to the trial balance, something's wrong. So we already tied it. So we're essentially done with our testing. But now, before we kind of wrap up, let's go back to our documentation that we added at the beginning and see what we actually documented to make sure that what we documented, we actually performed. So the purpose of this work paper was to test the existence, completeness, and accuracy of the cash balance as of 12/31/2022. So the first thing we did, BC confirmed the cash account balances directly with the bank as of 12/31/2022. You guys know we did that because the bank balance is here. We confirmed them on tab 4. So we did that already. Second thing we documented, BC obtained bank reconciliations for each bank account below directly from the client. Yes, we did that. We obtained all the bank recs and we summarized them here. BC summarized deposits in transit, outstanding checks, petty cash, and other reconciling items for all bank accounts. Yes, bank balance, deposit in transit, outstanding checks. We did that also. We documented see tab 6 for the listing of outstanding checks. Yes, that's correct. And tab 5 for the listing of deposits in transit. Correct, deposits in transit are on tab 5. BC tested outstanding checks for completeness and deposits in transit for existence at tab 7. That is correct. We did all the testing on this tab here. Cash testing, deposits in transit, cash testing, outstanding checks. BC deemed petty cash and other reconciling items immaterial and will pass on further testing. That's right. We had petty cash of $500 and we had no reconciling items. So we essentially passed on those for testing. They're immaterial. Last thing we did, BC recalculated the GL balance for each bank account and noted that the balance recalculated by BC agrees to the trial balance at tab 2. Or let's actually update that documentation and say agrees to the lead sheet at tab 2 without material exception. That's exactly what we did. We tied the cash lead sheet to this bank reconciliation. And since we got comfortable with every single component, outstanding checks, deposit, transit, bank balance, we essentially got comfortable with the entire thing. And now we're going to unhighlight this in yellow to signify that we're done. And then the conclusion of this work paper, based on the testing performed, cash appears to be complete and accurate as of 12/31/2022. This summary of how to test cash should hopefully get you comfortable with the basics and fundamentals of what you need to know to get comfortable with your client's cash balance. Every client is going to be completely different, and how they do their bookkeeping and how they keep their bank recs might be different, but as long as you conceptually understand how to test cash, any audit work assigned to you should not be an issue. Let's bring this all together and summarize how to test cash. The first thing you need to do is make sure the bank reconciliation you receive from your client agrees directly to the trial balance or lead sheet. The second thing you need to do is prepare and send out any bank confirmations for any material bank balances that your client is representing on the bank reconciliation. The third thing you need to remember is that deposits in transit are tested for existence as they're increasing an asset account. You complete the deposit in transit listing testing by selecting a sample of checks directly from the deposit in transit listing and citing a copy of it and testing for existence. The fourth thing you need to remember is that outstanding checks are tested for completeness. In order to test the completeness of the outstanding check listing, you need to request a subsequent bank statement of whatever period end you're testing. Your sample population of testing is going to be all cleared checks and wires subsequent to your period end. You will then select either checks or wires that cleared after period end and trace them back into the outstanding check listing to determine if the outstanding check listing is complete. Alright guys, that's going to be it for the video today. If you found value in this video, please make sure to hit the like button below for the YouTube algorithm. And if you have any other accounting or audit questions, please make sure to leave me a comment below. And until next time, you know what it is. Work hard, dress well, peace.